In the labyrinthine canals of Xochimilco, a stone's throw away from the heart of Mexico City, lies a place shrouded in whispers of dread and fascination, the Island of the Dolls. A macabre monument to a misunderstood man's obsession, the Isla de las Muñecas, as it is known locally, remains an enigmatic destination. Here, hundreds of glassy eyes stare blankly from the trees and fences, their decaying plastic bodies swaying eerily in the soft breeze, guardians of a secret only they knew. Mateo and Elena had heard the tales of this peculiar island, the unsettling lore woven into its very existence. As history enthusiasts, they were drawn to the mystery it held. This summer, they decided to turn their curiosity into a family vacation, thinking it an adventure to share with their two daughters, Julieta and Luciana. Mateo, a dedicated history professor, was a man of wisdom, his eyes always twinkling with the joy of imparting knowledge. Elena, a fiercely protective mother, balanced Mateo's wide-eyed fascination for the unknown with her grounded realism. Together, they had built a cocoon of love for their daughters. Julieta, barely a teenager, had inherited her father's curiosity, albeit tempered with her mother's caution. Luciana, only 6 and the youngest, was a radiant bundle of energy, her bright, innocent eyes full of wonder for the world around her. Despite the smiles, there was an underlying apprehension as their boat glided through the murky waters towards the Island of the Dolls. It began as whispers, stories told by hushed voices about the island's previous caretaker, a man named Rafael Lopez Mendoza. He was the puppet master, the architect of the chilling tableau of dismembered dolls that adorned the island. It was said that Mendoza had found the drowned body of a little girl in the canal, and soon after, a doll that he presumed was hers. Consumed by guilt and fear, he began hanging dolls around the island to appease the girl's spirit. The island became Mendoza's life, his sanctuary, and eventually his grave. Although presented as an anecdote, the tale made its way into the visitors' minds, lingering in their thoughts, wrapping its icy fingers around their hearts. The line between reality and lore blurred as the island loomed closer. The sun, a fiery orange ball, seemed to dim as it sunk low in the horizon, casting long, menacing shadows that swallowed the welcoming light. An ominous silence hung heavily in the air, punctuated only by the soft lapping of the canal water against the boat. Luciana was the first to break the silence, her youthful exuberance momentarily cutting through the thick tension. "Look, Mommy dolls," she said, her finger pointing excitedly at the sight that greeted them. And indeed there they were, the dolls, watching with unblinking eyes, the keepers of a horrifying secret that would soon ensnare the innocent family into its nightmarish reality. As the boat docked on the island's muddy bank, the family disembarked, their faces a mixture of apprehension and intrigue. The dolls watched in silence from their perches, their hollow eyes seeming to follow the newcomers. Luciana held tightly onto Elena's hand, her tiny fingers lost within her mother's firm grip. A spark of fear reflected in her round eyes, but her young spirit refused to let it consume her excitement. Her gaze swept over the surroundings, taking in the peculiar sights of the dolls hanging limply from branches, their decaying forms lending an eerie ambiance to the island. And then she saw it, a doll floating face down in the murky water near the dock. Its blonde curls danced with the current, seeming to beckon her. The doll wore a faded red dress, reminiscent of one Luciana owned, adding to her fascination. "Mommy!" she called, tugging at Elena's arm and pointing towards the water. "Look, there's a doll in the water!" Elena followed her daughter's gaze and felt a shudder run down her spine. She crouched down to Luciana's level, pulling the child close. "Luciana, you must promise me something," she said, her voice steady but firm. "Promise me you won't go near the water. It's not safe. Can you do that for me?" Luciana blinked up at her mother, her bright eyes growing solemn. "I promise, Mommy," she said, her small voice quivering slightly. Elena smiled reassuringly, planting a soft kiss on her daughter's forehead, hoping her fears were unfounded. As the family ventured deeper into the island, Luciana found her eyes drifting back towards the doll in the water. She had promised her mother, yes, but the doll's strange allure persisted. It floated gently, spinning lazily in the ebb and flow of the current, its glassy eyes hidden beneath the water's surface. The image of the red dress and the golden curls etched into her mind, the fascination growing stronger with each passing moment. Elena watched her youngest child, a knot of dread forming in her stomach. Matteo, oblivious to Elena's worry, led Julieta ahead, their voices a soft murmur against the uncanny silence of the island. The ghost of a smile graced Elena's lips as she watched them, her heart aching with love. Yet her eyes remained on Luciana, and the strange, floating doll that seemed to have captivated her. Oblivious to her mother's worry, Luciana's mind danced with questions. How did the doll end up in the water? Did it belong to another child like her? Was it lonely, floating there all alone? Little did she know, the mysteries of the island were just beginning to unravel. As they ventured further into the island, an unsettling symphony of whispering leaves and the creaking limbs of the doll-laden trees filled the air. Luciana stole one last glance at the doll in the water, her curiosity piqued, not knowing the terrifying journey that lay ahead. As Matteo led his family deeper into the island, he regaled them with the island's lore. Julieta listened with wide-eyed interest, occasionally casting worried glances at her little sister, who seemed lost in her own world. Luciana's thoughts, however, were consumed by the doll in the water. She remembered its red dress, its golden curls, and its face concealed beneath the water's surface. Walking through the unnerving maze of dolls was like traversing through a suspended moment of eerie stillness. They hung from every branch, every nook and cranny, their soulless eyes reflecting the dwindling sunlight. Some of them were damaged beyond recognition, the ravages of time evident on their discolored faces. Some had limbs missing, their tattered clothes swaying in the wind, adding an eerie melody to the island's strange symphony. As the afternoon sun began to fade, the shadows on the island seemed to dance and cavort. Elena's heart pounded in her chest, her protective instincts flaring up. An uncanny chill had started to pervade the air, wrapping the island in an ethereal shroud. Elena noticed that Luciana had grown quiet. The little girl seemed deep in thought, her brows furrowed. She asked Luciana if she was okay, to which the girl simply nodded, her eyes fixated on the direction of the water where the doll had floated. Matteo, meanwhile, had discovered what seemed to be the remains of Rafael Lopez Mendoza's dwelling. An old broken chair, a table overrun by moss and creepers, and the walls adorned with numerous dolls in various stages of decay. The sight sent a shiver down Matteo's spine. It was eerie, to say the least, but it was the morbid fascination of standing in Mendoza's living quarters that truly sent chills down his spine. It was then that Matteo thought he saw a movement from the corner of his eye. A fleeting figure, a hunched silhouette, almost blending into the surrounding shadows. He dismissed it as a trick of the failing light, yet a sense of unease lingered. Julieta, too, felt a sudden cold gust of wind, causing her to wrap her arms around herself. Suddenly, Luciana let out a gasp. Her small hand pointed towards the water, where the doll had drifted closer to the shore. It seemed to stare at her, its glassy eyes finally visible. A feeling of dread washed over Elena. She grabbed Luciana's hand tightly, but the little girl was transfixed, her heart pounding with excitement and fear. The air seemed to thicken as they made their way back to the boat, each step filled with an unexplainable dread. They could hear the water lapping against the shore, the trees whispering their ominous warnings. In the twilight, the dolls seemed to come alive, their hollow eyes reflecting the moonlight. And then they all heard it. A faint, echoing whisper. A hushed voice, carrying the weight of solitude and despair. The name Luciana seemed to hang in the air, seeping into their bones. They froze, the whisper wrapping itself around them. Luciana felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She turned to her mother, her eyes wide with fear. The whisper had called her name. It was a voice she didn't recognize, but it knew her. Elena hugged her tight, whispering words of comfort, but her eyes told a different story, a story of growing terror. Giulietta, holding onto Matteo, looked around fearfully. Matteo's face was pale, the stories of the island coming alive before his eyes. He had thought it all to be a lore, a dark tourism gimmick, but now the gravity of their situation was sinking in. In the unsettling silence that followed, the whispering trees, the watching dolls, and the rippling water seemed to be part of a grim spectacle. An unseen presence had made itself known, a spectral figure from the past. The ghost of Rafael Lopez Mendoza had joined their unfortunate excursion, its sights set on the unsuspecting Luciana. Nightfall draped the island of the dolls in an insidious blanket of shadows. The dolls, ghoulish sentinels of the island, peered from their perches. Elena clutched Luciana and Giulietta close, her heart pounding in her chest. Matteo stood tense, his professorial demeanor replaced with protective paternal fear. Suddenly, a piercing scream rent the night. Giulietta's cry was followed by a deafening silence. She pointed towards the spot where Luciana had been standing just moments before. The spot was now empty. Luciana was gone. Elena's heart dropped to her stomach. Her eyes darted frantically around the area, a primal fear seizing her. Matteo sprung into action, his voice echoing through the stillness as he called out their youngest daughter's name. But the island remained eerily silent, save for the soft rustling of the wind through the trees. Matteo and Elena searched the island with frantic desperation, calling out Luciana's name, but there was no response. Giulietta stayed rooted to her spot, paralyzed with fear, her gaze fixated on the undulating water nearby. A gasp caught in her throat as she noticed a small figure floating on the water's surface. A doll, its blonde curls spread out in a halo around its face. It wore a small red dress, the fabric billowing around it in the water. It looked hauntingly familiar. It looked like Luciana. With a trembling hand, Giulietta reached out and retrieved the doll. Its glassy eyes stared back at her, eerily similar to Luciana's bright ones. A realization chilled her to the bone. This was not just any doll, but a doll made in Luciana's image. Tears welled up in Giulietta's eyes, her hands clutching the doll tightly. She called out to her parents, her voice a strangled whisper. Elena turned around, her face going deathly pale as she saw the doll in Giulietta's hands. Matteo, rushing to their side, dropped to his knees at the sight. This wasn't just a family trip gone horribly wrong. This was a living nightmare. The island's lore was not just a story, but a chilling reality. The ghost of Rafael Lopez Mendoza was not a figure of the past, but a horrifying presence that had claimed their youngest daughter. A mix of fear, sorrow, and disbelief washed over them. Luciana, their beloved child, was gone. The doll, an ominous embodiment of their loss, floated silently on the water's surface, its lifeless eyes reflecting the moonlight. As they grieved their loss, the trees seemed to sway in a morose dance, the wind howling in mourning. The island bore silent witness to the family's devastation, its dolls staring on with hollow eyes. A harsh truth was becoming terrifyingly clear. The island of the dolls held a horrifying power, a power that transformed the living into the inanimate. The spirit of the island's former caretaker, Rafael Lopez Mendoza, was not just a ghost, but a malevolent force that had ensnared Luciana. In the heart-wrenching aftermath of Luciana's disappearance, the remaining members of the family rallied together in a desperate bid to find her. Armed with only the pale moonlight and their dwindling hope, they scoured the island, each call for Luciana tearing through the dreadful silence. Elena held the doll that bore Luciana's likeness, her hands shaking, her eyes teary. The sight of it brought forth a tumult of emotions within her, a mother's agony over the loss of her child, and an undying hope that she'd find her daughter alive. Matteo was a pillar of strength, concealing his own fear and pain, searching every nook and cranny of the island. His heart ached with the memory of Luciana's laughter, the sound now replaced with the eerie silence of the island. Giulietta grappled with her own guilt and fear, the image of Luciana playing with the floating doll embedded in her mind. She followed her parents, her voice joining theirs as they called out for Luciana. Their search was in vain. The island remained stoically silent, its haunting aura unbroken. The dolls watched on with their lifeless eyes, their faces seemingly mocking their desperate efforts. The sense of urgency was palpable as they made their way back to the boat, their last hope of escape. Their hearts pounded in unison, their breaths ragged with anxiety. As they pushed off from the eerie shores, the dolls seemed to leer at them from the darkness, a chilling reminder of their loss. Elena clutched the doll tighter, a symbolic piece of her lost child. Matteo navigated the waters, his heart heavy with sorrow and regret. Giulietta, looking back at the receding island, felt an inexplicable pull. It was as if Luciana's spirit was calling out to her from the depth of the island, held captive by the malevolent ghost of Rafael Lopez Mendoza. Their ordeal on the island of the dolls had tested their strength and unity. It had ruthlessly stripped away their sense of safety and normalcy. They had witnessed the horrifying transformation of their innocent family trip into a tragic nightmare. The experience was a terrifying testament to the lengths they'd go to protect their loved ones, even in the face of insurmountable terror. Their shared pain formed a bond stronger than the chilling fear that gripped them. Luciana, their lost ray of sunshine, became a beacon guiding them through their darkest hour. The love they had for her blinded them to the gruesome reality of the island, fueling their desperate hope to find her. With the horrific island of the dolls fading into the distance, they clung to each other, their hearts aching with the loss of Luciana. Each beat was a silent pledge, a promise to remember, to hope, and above all else, to love.